Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Where Peter is Live. We're coming to you today on the Feast of the Annunciation, March 25th. I'm joined today by a regular attending. Well, 2 out of 3.
Oh, no. Where's Mike?
At the beginning. I believe he's dealing with some parental duties at the moment. That's what it looks like. I'm joined today with Melinda Ribnek, one of our contributors, Paul Fahey. So let's just kind of
vu. This is total
I
deja
know.
vu.
We will mute Mike so that when he comes back, he doesn't interrupt us. Okay. Well, is everyone having a great feast day today? I know last week you talked about liturgical cupcakes, but
there's so many solemnities.
Right.
I know there's so many.
This week I totally kind of forgot. And I'm like, wait a minute, did we just have a solemnity? I am going to take ownership of like the worst Catholic mom on the internet. So, but I did just, if you saw my Twitter page, I did just buy the kids a big thing of red vines. And so I'm officially going to call that their Annunciation treat to be quiet while mom is working.
We didn't even really do a treat, but I did try to, so we're homeschooling like unexpectedly this year, and I tried to use like the math as a math lesson today. I was like, so babies are usually in their mom's tummies for 9 months, and it's the 3rd month, and then we go to the 12th month is Christmas. And my first grader, she just was like looking at me like, Mom, what are you talking about right now?
That's like, what do they call that curriculum where you get so many different areas at once? You get religion, like biology and math into like one. That's impressive, Rachel. That's why you're the best Catholic mom on the internet.
I am so not.
You're talking
Mike
stream,
made it.
STR,
He joined
instead of
the
STEM,
stream.
it's stream, like
Stream. Yes,
science,
that's what
technology, religion,
Yeah.
engineering, arts,
math and art. Arts,
yeah,
math.
it's like everything needs an acronym. Okay.
I
So,
knew that.
Mike's
Hey,
here.
Mike, welcome.
What did I miss?
Just the
We
show.
were just talking about the feast day.
Oh, the chit chat part.
Yeah, the chit chat.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
We
it.
sort of
That's
warm
it,
up.
Mike. Just the
Okay,
check.
microphones are all functioning. Everyone's good. Okay, so we're gonna shift in. We're gonna do our typical little prayer here today, and Paul is going to lead us in prayer. So let's all. Paul, take it away.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you for the gift of our Mother Mary. Mary, we thank you for your response to the angel. We thank you for your work in raising Christ and bringing him into the world to be our Savior. We pray together, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. See, I made the mistake. Last spring, when we shifted our parish staff meetings to Zoom, we tried saying prayers all together, and the half-second lag made praying all together not great. So
Yeah, I've been in that experience. I think with my son's confirmation class, it was like 100. It was like 100 people on the same Zoom. But it reminds me. Someone tweeted recently that one of the things that drove them crazy is Catholics who can't keep the rhythm, like in prayer. Like during Mass when it's like someone's like. But the thing is, so my dad was a convert to the Catholic faith. He converted in his 20s. And he had been Methodist before that. He never got the Catholic rhythm. Like he was done with the Our Father 6 seconds before the rest of the congregation was. And it drove me up a wall. But like now I miss it. Like that's what that made me think of with hearing, Rachel a half second after.
You're welcome.
Can I just say that I said amen at the end of the first half of the Hail Mary, and I forgot we have to do the other half. So no matter what you do, you can't be worse than me at you missed it. You can watch the retake. You guys are like Hail Mary, full of grace, blah, 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 and then I'm like amen, and you guys are like, wait, Holy Mary.
Well, when I praying the rosary, like you're praying it like silently by yourself. Do you ever think to yourself? Like you're like 2 Hail Marys into a decade, and then you're like, have I been praying the whole thing?
Oh my gosh, yes. And then
I'm imagining it.
And then it's like, do I go back or do I go forward? Like, did my guardian angel fill in that? Oh, I probably prayed the whole
I
thing.
think-
No.
exactly. We're all like, the guardian angel did it. It'd be all right.
I think that's the mark of if you're a scrupulous person or not. If you go back and re-pray, then it's the scrupulosity. If you keep going, you're just like, the Lord will make up for it.
Or like if you're on the third mystery and you're still thinking about the first one, or didn't even remember
You
that.
forgot.
You know.
Or if you're using your hands, and you forget, like you get to the end of one hand and you're like, wait, did I start on the other hand? Like, am I at 5 or 10?
The whole system for that. That's
Man,
like
so
easy
you guys
for
are
me.
talking about praying the rosary like you do it all the time, and that puts you like levels ahead of me here. So
Oh, don't worry. If I did it all the time, I'd have a better. No, no, it's ebbs and flows. Ebbs and flows.
Yeah,
But,
for
yeah.
real. Pope Francis talked yesterday on the Vigil for the Annunciation about praying with Mary and how none of our prayers with her are in vain because she's our mom.
That's
so
good.
even if we kind of mess up, lose track of things, like she's a mom and she kind of covers for you. So I kind of like that perception of Mary's motherhood. He also said something somewhat controversial, or it's at least hit some headlines in this Wednesday audience yesterday. He said that sometimes our exaggerated love for our mama, Mary, can cause us to give her some titles that maybe aren't quite exactly theologically correct. And he included the title of co-redemptrix in there. And so, Paul, I know that you're able to give a better recap of this whole idea of Mary as co-redemptrix. So can you just kind of fill our viewers and listeners in?
yeah, so it's been kind of a discussion in the church for a while, and this is not the first time the Pope has been critical of the title of co-redemptrix. And then Cardinal Ratzinger, he was as well, though I believe John Paul II used the title. So anyways, the idea behind the title is, so Christ is the Redeemer, and the Pope really emphasized that in his statement yesterday. He's the Redeemer, but the baptized members of the church as members of the body of Christ can cooperate with Christ's redemption, right? Through our holiness, through our prayers, through our good works, we cooperate with Christ's redemption. Mary has a singularly privileged place of cooperation, right? She's the singularly privileged cooperator. So that's the theology behind giving her the title of co-redemptrix. So the Pope isn't denying any of that theology at all, but he clearly doesn't like the title. And I think it's because it could give the impression that like she's greater than a disciple, or like semi-equal to Jesus or something like that. But he's really trying to emphasize that Jesus is the Redeemer. And I also think it may be, and Cardinal Ratzinger talked about this, that like this arose out of the Middle Ages and was really talked about most by popes, I think in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Oh,
So it may be like scholastic language that the post-Vatican II Church is trying to move away from. So there isn't much like scriptural and early church father use of this terminology. So I think that may be why Pope Francis is trying to distance himself from that as well.
Well, and I think one of the things is, like, if I recall correctly, that, yeah, because it emerged maybe in the Middle Ages, I mean, theologically, yeah, it's a good point. It makes sense. It's one of those things, though, where the word or the prefix co, I mean, it could mean like co-pilot, so not actually the real pilot, but, you know, she's essential to our, obviously today we're celebrating the reason why she's essential to our salvation history, because she is the mother of God. But all the other Marian dogmas are sort of matters of fact. Like, we believe these are things that actually happened historically. She's the mother of God. She was a perpetual virgin. She was conceived immaculately. She was assumed into heaven. Whereas co-redemptrix is sort of like, oh, well, if we piece all these parts of the puzzle together, then, and I mean, I think I'm oversimplifying it. Obviously, I'm not an expert on Mariology, but I've heard a lot of the arguments or the confusion that it's caused. But there are a lot of people out there who really do pray deeply for the fifth Marian dogma to be to be approved, or to be promulgated, I guess, through an ex cathedra statement. I believe it was discussed at length, and I think this is where Pope Benedict got his, or where his thought may come from, or it springs from this discussion, was before the council. And one of the things was, it was like, well, we believe these things theologically, but is it, like, why is it necessary to put out a dogma that is going to further confuse our Protestant brothers and sisters about Mary's role, about, if she's a co-redemptrix, does that mean she's on par with Jesus? Do we think she's superhuman? Do we think she's, we've already got 4 Marian dogmas that we fight about, that we argue about with them. This just seems like piling on, and it doesn't really change what we believe about her as Catholics.
It was John the 23rd that took that off the table, right?
Yeah.
Before the council.
So anyway, just some thoughts on that.
Just some background on Mary.
And if anybody does want to read some background on that specific issue, we did last time this came up with Pope Francis, and it's actually gotten a lot of traffic today. And I'll put it in the comments here.
Yeah, from December 2019.
Yeah. Where Pope Francis made maybe a milder but a milder critique of the term. And Robert Fastigi, who is a seminary professor up at Sacred Heart Seminary in Paul's home state of Michigan, wrote an essay explaining what co-redemptrix is. I think he favors a dogmatic declaration at some point, which is fine. Within Orthodoxy, there are plenty of ways there's a lot of leeway. There's flexibility. People have different emphases, but really in that, but also explaining that what the proposed or imagined dogma would be is really already part of our theology. I guess it's just, do we want it streamlined, bundled up, and declared as a matter of infallible teaching? So. Yeah.
So we would be remiss if we didn't kind of acknowledge some things that are happening in the United States this past week. We've seen 2 new outbreaks of gun violence and mass shooting events. In Atlanta, we saw Asian women specifically targeted in a series of shootings. 6 of the 8 victims in those attacks were Asian women. And then more recently this week, we had another shooting at a grocery store in Colorado. It seemed like we kind of got a break from hearing news kind of repeatedly about these sorts of mass shooting events in the United States with the pandemic, but it seems like, at least my perception is that as things are opening up, we're seeing a lot more of it happening. And one of the things that, I was revisiting what Pope Francis has said about, the weapons trade and guns, and he's spoken out about a few things. But especially recently, he even called attention to the fact that there was record-setting gun sales last year during the pandemic in the United States. And he really called attention to what he called the hyperinflation of the individual and people losing the sense of the common good. And he kind of almost predicted that we might see future terrible events like this happening again. It just seems the loss of the common good is something that we see come to bear in all different areas of our social life. It's all sort of connected. But part of that is definitely the racism that's underlied a bunch of these events, especially the anti-Asian hatred that motivated, likely, or seems to have at least partially motivated the shooter in Atlanta. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. I know it's been something that we've been talking about, and just seeing a lot of hurt and pain from our Asian and Asian American brothers and sisters who haven't had attention brought to the racism that they often suffer, and especially in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. And there's been a massive increase of anti-Asian attacks throughout the country.
I think the stat was like 140% increase. And a lot of the rhetoric, again, we heard from former President Trump with the Chinese virus and all of that. Humans were very prone to scapegoat. So scapegoating, China, and then, of course, by extension, for some, all of Asians, was a trap that many fell for. And then we also do know, too, that race is an issue in these shootings, for sure. There's when we use terms, we should be careful of like the definition of them. So there's mass shooting rates, right, which include anybody who has been injured, not necessarily killed. That would be like 3 to 4 victims is typically generally the definition, right? And so we have stats that bear that out that kind of for more or less somewhat reflect the population. But those stats for those mass shootings also are taking into consideration like gang violence, domestic disputes, robberies, anywhere where 3 or 4 or more people are shot. And so then we have something else, which is domestic terrorism, right? And we have extremist violence. And that is grossly disproportionately a white supremacy issue in the country. And as we know, although white supremacy has been an issue since before we were founded as a country, and the last year or two, it's become explicit, longer than a year or two, but especially during, the last administration, it's become more explicit and stated, and the fires were stoked and all of this. And so people predicted that these types of incidences would happen, and that is what happened. And that's not, and so the stat for domestic terrorism post 2001, September 11th, to I think the congressional report on it was 2019, was that 73% of all extremist incidences that end in fatalities were from white supremacy, and then the other 27% were from Islamic extremists. So you would think about the awful Miami nightclub and San Bernardino and the Boston bombing, right? Those would be the other. And then there were no other groups besides those two. So what we know is that, yes, white supremacy, racism has a large role in the violence that we see. And then as we're also having this discussion, there is also the issue of gun violence. So there's multiple ways to approach this. And so we do need to talk about the racism issue. It does appear that the last shooting in Colorado, was from a Muslim man, right? So we don't know the role that like white supremacy, or we don't even know the role that his own beliefs, whether they're extreme or not, played in. But we do know that that gun was bought 6 days after the NRA. Does someone know all? I feel like I don't want to state this incorrectly, but 10 days prior, right? The NRA had appealed some legislation from not making those assault rifles legal, right? And then he buys it a few days later, and then a few days later we have 10 people dead. And so we do know too that gun violence is, also an issue to come at this from. And what I was tweeting about was the issue of where does my right, to be safe, confront somebody's right to go buy a semi-automatic weapons without, the necessary checks and balances in place. And I will say, and I want to, open this up to y'all's thoughts too, but for me, I cannot get over that not every time, but a lot of the times I'm at a grocery store, I'm sitting in mass, I'm somewhere, and I'm looking at my kids, and I have 7 of them. And I have had to have the mental game of deciding if something happens, who do I grab? And by nature, who do I have to not grab, right? And these kind of heartbreaking thoughts and discussions we have to have are reality. So at some point, we've got to start, addressing where does the common good, where do all of our rights to be safe in our common, home confront an individual's right to own that kind of weaponry?
One of the things that, okay, now I guess I'm speaking about this as somebody who, even though I grew up in a fairly conservative environment, I grew up in a blue state on the East Coast, near in between 2 major cities, and to me, I've never, and I mean, it's funny because I talk to people from like Montana and Texas, and they'll like laugh at me. I don't understand the need. I mean, I guess there, maybe some people enjoy shooting targets recreationally. Some people, obviously, hunting was a major part. It was a major food source for us, and is probably for some people out in the country even now. But to me, it just seems that when somebody has a gun, they wield so much power that if something snaps, or even if you're at, if you're at the shooting range, I mean, what's to stop somebody from, I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems like so much power in someone's hands. And yeah, the vast majority of gun owners aren't planning to shoot anyone, and most of them don't shoot anyone, but it just seems that they can so easily get into the hands of somebody. And is it worth the cost? I mean, the Second Amendment is kind of built into the American psyche. In Europe and other places around the world, it strikes people as odd that Americans can just have a gun, in different places. I mean, open carry laws in some places, and that people have collections. And I mean, I don't know. I'm not from an area where that's a big culture, where it kind of people look at it as like, oh wow, that's kind of like an odd mentality to have.
Well, I would say it's not just an American mentality, though, because it's also seeped in very much into like the Christian mentality. And for a while, right, the religious right. And for a while, Catholics have been kind of more separate in identity from evangelical Christians. And that's always been a thing on the religious right. But I was noting this summer as those sales were skyrocketing. Okay, those sales were skyrocketing. It was by the millions of guns, right? Because people were like in fear because of the polarized language, because of the unrest that could come with the pandemic. So basically at the time I was like, why is it okay that we see this kind of escalation of rates when people are buying out of fear, anxieties, like stoked hatred? Like none of that was a good reason to buy guns. But you saw, and again, this is where Catholics need to see this is a problem in our circles. You saw Tim Gordon come and do videos where he explicitly, I have a friend who literally bought a gun because she watched a Tim Gordon video in which he was, telling Catholics to go arm up for the Civil War. So you see the very pro-gun.
This is a problem.
Well, in the gun range in
Right,
Veritatis Splendor's
Tyler, Texas.
Texas plan, it's like, oh, this is our Catholic community, and here's the gun range.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like
saying Americans too. I think we have to also be clear. This is also a very it's in whites religious right circles, right? Because you don't see the gun ownership as being a culture in other ethnicities in America, right? And so, let's I do think we have to identify the problem. This is the religious right in America's gun culture, right? That has quickly come into Catholic culture as well.
So
we've had someone point out, I was just going to highlight that comment as well, Mike, that someone pointed out, suicides were up dramatically in 2020, as far as we know from data. And the rise in gun sales cannot have affected that positively. Like it would only make it go even higher. And so it's just such a dangerous situation we find ourselves in. And it really is a situation where to pursue the common good together, we need to let go of some of these individualistic ideas and really try to work together to talk about our shared concerns, our shared values, and see what we can do as a society to address these kinds of problems. And I think the polarization Melinda is pointing out, and how there are these factions, even within our own church, that exacerbate these divisions, make us even farther away from a point where we can come together and do that. And so this might be a good point to transition to our next kind of topic that we were planning on covering, which is this polarization, especially in Catholic media, and how it's influenced your average person in the pew. Earlier this week, the Bulwark, Jonathan V. Last's column in the Bulwark actually featured one of my tweets about Tim Gordon, who Melinda just mentioned, which was kind of weirdly surprising. I had a couple people send it to me at the same time, like, "Oh, you made the Bulwark."
And you're like, not what I want to be talking about, but yes, I do.
Right. And so what was actually shared was something I had tweeted about Tim Gordon, well, the Gordon brothers, because Tim Gordon has a brother named David Gordon, and they had been promoting and working on a book about feminism for a while that they had been kind of talking about and planning. And it was supposed to be published by Sophia Institute Press, last year. And then
this Taylor Marshall's publisher, and which
is the publisher of Infiltration. They have a forthcoming book from Austin Ruse as well. I'm not sure what that title was, but and they are affiliated with or kind of in a partnership with EWTN Publishing. So
EWTN's book publishing arm, or they have some agreement of some kind with them.
Yeah. But the Gordons had gotten the book dropped by Sophia Institute Press over some really inflammatory, frankly misogynistic tweets that David Gordon had sent a while back. Now these
I don't believe it, Rachel. I don't believe they would say anything misogynistic and inflammatory.
Well, I'll tell you what the tweet said, because I looked it up the other day to be reminded.
Yeah. And they're not embarrassed by this. Like, we're not, this is not calumny. Like, they are open, and they're open also about their goal is to shift the Overton window. So the Overton window of like socially acceptable discourse. So their goal is to do that, and reactionaries do this by just saying the most extreme things possible to get the whole window to shift over. So that's their approach. And Melinda, okay, you want to describe this? Because I don't.
Well, the tweet said, and now I'm forgetting the exact adjective, but the most, I think, regrettable, some synonym of regrettable thing in our society are abortions and plus-size models.
Yeah. And it was a photo of like just an ad, like a really body positive ad for women's activewear that he had come across in a Walmart. Like, this was really triggering for him that there was a woman who was plus sized in leggings and a sports bra. And so he tweeted that photo with that caption, and that got him dropped by Sophia Institute Press. He then went and he works for Church Militant. So he wrote a post or a column, a screed really, about his firing and how this is unfair cancel culture. And that is how they announced really that the book was kind of off. So this is the tweet that got shared in the Bulwark. And it was just one example that Last cited of culture wars basically wrecking the Catholic Church, because this kind of reactionary, misogynistic approach is not unique to Catholics. Like, we see it in other alt-right type figures all the time. But what Last pointed out was also EWTN has kind of dabbled in some of the GOP talking points, which, Mike, you might know something about EWTN and
a little bit. Yeah. Well, they
parroting.
They interviewed, what's her name? Taylor Green.
Margaret Taylor Green. Yeah.
On EWTN News, and they presented this very positive portrait of her. I guess her fellow Congress people wanted to censure her, and she basically gave her
remove her from Congress.
Remove her, and I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
I mean, the presentation was because she was pro-life and because she was a Christian and because she was, standing
under
up for
spiritual attack.
And they just presented this unqualified with no pushback. Here's the thing: she's not even Catholic. So this is somehow Catholic news that this person who's an open QAnon supporter who somehow got into Congress is now playing the victim, and the Catholic television station of note is acting like this is a totally justified situation. When you talk about the Overton window, though, sorry to interrupt, but
that's okay.
But it's like I did not. Maybe I wasn't aware of that shifting Overton window when we started Where Peter Is. Like, I honestly thought there were some good faith disagreements with Pope Francis that were based on misunderstandings. If you look at the complaints about Amoris Laetitia, for example, the day after it came out, Cardinal Burke wrote a column in the National Catholic Register saying it is not part of the magisterium. And his justification for that was a statement in paragraph 3 of the exhortation that basically said, not everything has to be answered by an intervention of the magisterium. It didn't say, by the way, the 300 something paragraphs that follow are not part of the magisterium. It was that, I can't cover everything in one book was all it meant. And people picked up on that line and they were sharing this, Cardinal Burke says it's not magisterial. That became sort of the talking point. And I thought, well, obviously it is by all accounts magisterial. Pope Francis said it was magisterial. Then he promulgated the Buenos Aires directives and said, these are magisterial. Who gets to decide what's magisterial? It is the Pope. And thank you, Patrick. What has happened?
I was like, yay, Patrick's back. Go ahead, Mike, we're listening.
Anyway, but so I just thought, let's just show people, you want to be a conscientious, reasonable, thoughtful Catholic who thinks about these issues positively. Take a look at what Vigano has said. It correlates, later on, it was it correlates with the QAnon conspiracy theory. He's saying so-and-so is in league with, the Pope is in league with the devil. He's saying these things that can be verified that aren't factual. Cardinal Burke starts advocating that, saying that the third secret of, saying that Russia hasn't been consecrated to the Sacred Heart in the way that Our Lady of Fatima asked, even though Sister Lucia and Pope John Paul II said it was in the 1980s. So I'm let's bring some of these things to light so that people can really see that there's some seriously bizarre things that are going on in these circles. There are ideologies and ideas and false assumptions that are underlying it. But what I've come to realize over the course of time is that Overton window has shifted. Now.
Can you define for some of us what you mean by Overton window? Because I haven't heard that. So
it's some kind of communication theory. I'm guessing the guy who coined it was named Overton. But it's
I'm just
within
wondering
the
if everyone listening too doesn't.
Yeah, so the Overton window is the window of socially acceptable discourse. Not necessarily politically correct, but it's okay to talk in these ways.
Gotcha.
And so the underlying idea is if we want to actually make our views known, then we need to move the window to closer to where it is acceptable. Our views are considered acceptable.
That's
the idea
assuming
is
that you have extreme views, right?
Yeah. Right. And I think that a lot of the narrative around those kinds of figures that what they use to justify sort of some of these reactionary views is that the Overton window has shifted to wokeness or some PC perspective where now it's not even acceptable to hold traditional views of sex or marriage or be anti-abortion or any number of things. So
or to be a misogynist.
Yeah. But they're saying in order to shift it back even towards those good things, we have to be really extreme. It's you put a heavy weight on the end to tip the scales in your favor. You can't see my great arm gestures to illustrate this for you.
I didn't mean to interrupt, Mike. Thank you for that.
In the Catholic sense, early on, I remember, there'd be these crazy people on social media who would be, they would be Deus Vult, 2016. And with a picture of some knight with a skeleton for a head, ready to whack a dragon or something. And they would say Pope Francis is a heretic. But then you'd have other people come in, even Cardinal Burke or, and they'd say, nobody's saying Pope Francis is a heretic. He's saying some things, however, that are confusing the faithful and are giving them the wrong impression. And, it's so tiring that we have to clarify Pope Francis because even though he means well, right, And they're like, he does do some nice things. I understand the gestures. They're very nice, but you have to be precise when it comes to the teachings, you know, and then
able to say that
now,
took advantage of
now those
but that
same
took advantage
people,
of the window having shifted.
now some of the people, the window has shifted to the point where their discourse is, should we depose Pope Francis for heresy, or has Pope Benedict been the Pope all along? And it's the same people saying that, you know, it's like, it's just moved to that point where the things that like people think, I mean, you can watch this drift, you know, from Father Z, who started, Father John Zulsdorf, What Does the Prayer Really Say blog, started off with reading Francis through Benedict in 2013, 2014. Oh, well, how can we understand Francis through the hermeneutic of continuity, to the point where he's openly flirting with the fact that Francis was never really the Pope and that Benedict is still the Pope, and saying that nobody has ever countered the accusations of heresy against Francis that these obscure people have compiled in a book. And like, how did they get from there to there? And don't they want to know the other side of the story? Like, that was one of the things when, you know, I wrote that piece where it was like, challenge accepted. Like, you say that nobody has countered the dubia, nobody's countered the Amazon prayer ritual wasn't paganism. Nobody's, and it's sort of like, first of all, they don't link to us. Like, I did actually mention that in my reply, and we wound up getting a link from Father Z. But also, like, when I wrote the piece about Raymond Arroyo and Archbishop Vigano, I got no hate mail. I got nobody challenging me, because when Raymond Arroyo trashed a false version of my position, like, he didn't say what my argument was or what my evidence was. He made up he made up facts that were not my case. He didn't mention my name. He didn't mention my blog.
It's because they want to keep the echo chamber closed. They don't want reason to get in. They don't want.
And it's like, now I'm the type of person where I hear somebody alluding to somebody lying about somebody else in public. Like, I want to dig. I want to find out who it is. I'm going to research it. I'm going to be like, let me hear the other side of the story. Like, why are these two people in conflict with each other? But he's built it in such a way that he knows it's these little old ladies who watch EWTN that are watching his program, and they're not going to Google who's been accusing him of doing a fake interview with Vegan. If he gave them my name, they might look it up. And I am more than happy to explain why Raymond was dishonest in his response to me. Another thing is, like, Taylor Marshall. Like, everyone here, I assume, has been blocked by Taylor Marshall on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I love the tweet I got blocked for.
I'm not on Twitter enough to even know.
No, but I remember the first article I was going to write for WPI. I approached you and I said, "Look, I want to write this, this big expose or whatever, because people need to know who Taylor Marshall is, and people don't even know." Oh my goodness! So that never got published.
We can publish it. Actually, our Patreon subscribers can read the draft. That I'm going to put that up if I can find that draft.
Those are great rewards there, Mike. The drafts that never made it.
Melinda's magnum opus.
It's like the outtakes from Where Peter Is. If you want to read, Melinda Ribnek spent like 43 hours transcribing Taylor Marshall. I didn't even really know you at the time. It was this random person.
I was transcribed. First of all, okay, I want to keep this very charitable, but I had to listen through these videos of this man. Yeah. So one day I'm like, Mike, I'm listening to this thing. It's taking, and you're like, there's a transcript button at the top of the little YouTube, whatever. And I was like, when you go to YouTube, you can like pull out the transcript of what people say. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have been literally burning off purgatory listening to this man. It is mind-numbing. And now you tell me, but that 4,000 word essay that nobody wants to read.
Our patrons want to read it.
I want to read it.
And they can.
It got so long because I even like dwindled it down to 3 videos, which I watched but like every statement that came out of the man's mouth wasn't true. And you can back it up with a reason or a citation of where it was objectively false. And so that was really eye-opening to me, because I was like, the people watching this are not even, they're not basic fact checking. They're not like it's just affirming a base. They're not even trying to see if what this man, so this man can come and like say that, you know, Pope Francis is the worst, you know, whatever, right? The heretic, whatever, who knows? And these people will allow, we've gotten to a point where 2021 Catholics will allow someone to call Pope Francis a heretic without even doing basic fact checks. And it's crazy.
And it shifted. And I think, at least for me, working in a parish, this is one of the bigger problems. It's not necessarily that I hear people in my parish calling Pope Francis a heretic, but it shifted the discussion so much that there's this like atmosphere of suspicion.
Oh yeah.
Why would we ever have an atmosphere of suspicion towards anything
about
the Pope says, right? Or there's this like, oh, Vigano is a person, like a credible person, and not a total kook, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, so the extreme like online rhetoric has, and EWTN, right, has like just shifted it. So there's this atmosphere that prevents people from being able to access what Pope Francis is saying right now to them and here and now.
Well, and that's what I think a lot of like bishops and priests don't realize. It's like, and even some of them don't really quite get it. Like some of them want to say, oh, I want to stay out of it. I don't want to be part of this polarization. I don't want to contribute to it.
But how many bishops endorsed Vigano in 2018?
But the thing is, they not only are they not looking closely at it, they're not looking closely at the counter argument. They don't know that where Peter is out there doing the homework, digging up, you know, and we're not the only, I mean, Austin Ivory, Stephen Walford back in the day, Scott Eric Alt, David Winnott, Dave Armstrong, like people have really dug into this, and a lot of people have done amazing work to debunk some of this stuff. But the thing is, like, I found that people who are like, oh, well, I don't say bad things about the Pope. But the fact of the matter is, they have already developed this negative, suspicious sense about him. And then, like, they don't have the facts. They don't know the story. They've got this general sense that he's kind of not good. And then they just want to stay out of it because they're charitable. Well, but they don't realize that the people are brainwashed that they're dealing with.
Well, yeah. I mean, priests aren't realizing this, but it's also the general atmosphere of suspicion around Pope Francis, coupled with this weird hyper focus on specific, like, triggering issues. Like, to go back to the Gordon example, it's the underlying kind of misogyny, or if they see feminism, they are going to react against it. And it's this really myopic view of, like, what it is to be a true faithful Christian to them, or faithful Catholic, probably is what they would say, is to hold Orthodox, whatever they define as Orthodox teaching, on a particular topic. So on, like, patriarchy in Catholic families, or on human sexuality. That is the hallmark. It's not like all of this other stuff around it can be compromised. All of how we preach the truth, how we speak in charity, how we approach those who disagree with us. That's kind of, we can let that go. We just need to hammer home these truths. And
anything that's been taught in the last 40 years is optional. I mean,
it's all suspect.
So Milo's a good example. A couple of weeks ago, he gave an interview with LifeSite News, and he was being heralded as this, like, you know, like prodigal son returns type of thing. Why? Because he said that, like, he's no longer living as a gay person. Actually, I think he said he's ex-gay, which comes with a whole host of problems, right?
Or connotations.
Connotations, but he's also like, you know, he's still making violent threats even in this interview. Like he's still saying these horrible things, but it's as if, well, he says he's ex-gay, so that, like, covers a multitude of the rest of his sins. Or, well, even with, like, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she hates liberals, so that covers the rest of her sins, right? Like,
she's pro-life, so that covers everything.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Like you said, we just focus on these really specific things, and it doesn't matter, right?
Well, so I want to give an example of exactly what you're saying, Paul. So I watched a clip today that someone sent me with Milo and Tim Gordon's interview, whatever. Anyway, and then he says, oh, well, the guy who, did you guys see this? The guy who finally repeals the 19th Amendment, which is the right for women to vote, would be the new sexiest guy. And there he would have hundreds of women want to sleep with him. Okay, so I don't want to go on that tangent because we all know that that's straight up insanity. And he's like, I'm in this chat room and all the women are saying yes, yes, yes. And I'm like, congratulations for finding like a chat room of really broken women. But regardless, but yes, Paul, like it's the same thing. He can come and say women shouldn't have, it's sexy for women to not have the vote, right? A man who would be against us is sexy, and people are still lauding him. Why? Because he believes that you can become ex-gay. Because, and Rachel, you were heading in this direction because you were saying this, because for this group of people, like the faith is all boiled down to specific what they would call orthodox issues. But I would say that those issues must always, it's always sexual politics or sexuality, because they certainly don't mind like devaluing all of Catholic social teaching. But yes, it's this like idolization and this kind of almost when we talk about like evils being a distortion of a good or goods brought out of proper order, it's that kind of manipulation of the goods of Catholic social teaching where it's, to the extent, or Catholic sexual teaching where it's manipulated and brought out of order. But that is the whole definition of it, is as long as you are okay on what we consider to be orthodox sexual politics, then you can do whatever you want. You can be in the Proud Boys, you can be, racist, you can be whatever. That's cool. You can be against women voting because somehow Catholic sexual issues is just about like sex. It's not even about the whole of respect of women.
It's not about a person. It's
right. It's not about a person. It's just about sex. So
two things I want to say about what you just said, Melinda.
All right, let's go.
Number one, first of all, because this was a dare that was brought up to us, people in where Peter is, people who were, as soon as Milo came out with his statement, and then to a lesser or maybe even to a greater degree when the CDF document on blessing of same-sex couples came out, they said, okay, well, where are you now? Are you orthodox on this? Why aren't you praising Milo saying this? Well, first of all, I hope and I pray that Milo lives a life of chastity, that he embraces that. That is a good thing, period. That is what the Catholic Church teaches. Great. But has he converted? Has he really experienced it sounded like he intellectually already believed in the Catholic Church. It's just that he hadn't brought himself to change his lifestyle at that point, his idea of the Catholic Church. But obviously his positions on race, his positions on Catholic social teaching, his approach towards other people, the idea of being charitable, the idea of respecting the magisterial authority of the church, respecting the Pope. I believe, did he wrote at least a column, maybe even a book against the Pope.
A book, yeah.
Yeah, and he hasn't repealed that. So in a lot of ways, it's sort of like, okay, well, that's fine, but don't lord the guy over us like he's some kind of example to be followed, because all of us have areas of where we don't meet the mark. And I certainly don't consider him a role model.
Absolutely. Well, and even when you said, hey, okay, we want people to live a chaste life, is chaste literally just defined by physically not having unmarried sex? Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, what you're saying is that whole thing. So I just wanted to like go to that tiny little point, but yes, like that's the whole point. Like, why are we considering this man who's saying that it's sexy for women not to vote chaste? Like, what kind of chastity is that?
That's not chastity.
And point number two. I want to bring up point number two.
Okay, Mike.
I will not interrupt.
And this is key, and this is a magisterial teaching of the Catholic Church that was emphasized at Vatican I in 1870 and has been repeated by every single pope since then, in some way magisterially, possibly with the exception of John Paul I, but that was only because he was pope for 33 days. It's that the Pope is the guarantor of orthodoxy. And somehow, and it's funny because Austin Ruse recently unblocked me. He called me well, both you and me, right, Melinda?
He did unblock me, but now he's like stalking me. So
well, yeah,
because I have blocked him now, and he's still at my page constantly. So
a member of the dissident left. I was the dissident left. You were the dissident left.
I'm dissident.
Dissident. With you and your 7 kids, me and my home school. I mean, I only have 4 kids, so trust but verify. But
we're not getting into that right now
because I have kids. But yeah, it's like show me when I'm dissident. Like
exactly. And so but it's sort of like, where does their concept of orthodoxy come from?
Oh, like he said. Remember, he keeps telling you, Mike, stop hating. What is it
Orthodox
called?
Catholics. Organized Orthodoxy.
Organized Orthodox. Like, what is organized Orthodox? Like,
that is known as the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
Yes, that's the Catechism. That's
organized Orthodoxy.
Okay, I'm an idiot.
Book.
Does he believe that the Catechism is Is that his definition?
I don't know.
He doesn't like organizations that are based on what he thinks is orthodox.
Wait, is that a real thing though? Like, is that a real
No, I mean
it's organized. And it's orthodox.
Yeah.
Is that your definition or his definition?
Oh, that's my definition.
No. His definition is like
we're thinking the same thing at the same time right there.
Yeah. His definition is when Michael Voris decides to start a television station or a website and organize it and say they're orthodox.
Okay, so basically we need to organize our site more. Is that what he's saying? Like
No. He's saying that we're the dissident left. We don't agree with orthodoxy, as opposed to
we're disorganized.
I don't think. As opposed to like we just resent that EWTN is a bunch of Orthodox Catholics who have gotten together and organized and started So that's what I think that's what his definition is. But it's like, wait a minute, no, I object to EWTN's dissent. Like, they openly dissent from Catholic teaching. Father Gerald Murray, who is part of the papal posse, was one of the people who blurbed that book that accused the Pope of being a heretic, and maybe not even the real Pope.
Right, and they're chummy with some of these figures like Tim Gordon. They're appearing on their podcasts.
Yeah, and Cardinal Burke used to show up on the World Over all the time, and
showed up.
Right.
Vigano did a pre-scripted interview and declared the terms, and then they cut out the most crazy parts because their audience probably couldn't handle it. But I digress.
And to me, it's not just a problem that we're not just saying it's a problem that EWTN dissents. Like, that's a problem, obviously. But the root of that problem is deeper, and it comes with this like really myopic focus on specific issues as like the hallmarks or the indicators of orthodoxy. And I feel like that underlying problem has kind of skewed perspectives for a while now. And one of the ways we can see that is I think all of us, or at least a few of us, are rereading Amoris Laetitia. Or I'm kind of reading the whole thing straight through for the first time.
I just finished today.
Yeah. Okay, you just finished. It's a long one. So here's the thing. That's what I was going to say is if you want to talk about organized orthodoxy, like the zoomed out view of marriage and family life, like to systematically kind of walk through that, as Pope Francis did in that apostolic exhortation, takes a really long time. It is 8 chapters plus it's 9 chapters.
Yeah,
it's super long. Okay. Printing it
People
off.
stopped at 8, started at 8 and stopped at 8.
People started at 8, stopped at 8, only read 8. But it is very long and it's very comprehensive and in-depth, and it situates these issues that people tend to focus on in the broader context of like what marriage is, what love is, and how love is lived throughout a couple's life, and how love is not like conjugal love, say love between spouses, is not just like following these sexual teachings in the right way and like ticking boxes. It is happening in the context of a really integrated relationship and something that is occurring as a couple matures through their life and has children. He talks about like aged couples, like how they develop new levels of emotional intimacy. Like, it's just these things that if you only took maybe a version like a Cliff's Notes version of what you would see on EWTN or read in like your average marriage prep packet, they would kind of gloss over that. It wouldn't just kind of explore all of those dimensions of love. And so I just wonder how much people's perspectives have been skewed in ways that we're only starting to realize because Pope Francis is challenging us with that more expansive view of marriage and family life. I'm not sure if anyone else has impressions from reading the document recently, like compared to all the things we see out there in the media or in kind of the broader culture. I know that in pastoral ministry, Paul, that you have dealt with engaged married couples and you've written about this. You have a few published pieces. So what is maybe like, have you seen maybe this weirdly hyper sexualized focus of ministry to married couples and families kind of play out? What are some examples that you can draw from?
I mean, I think, and this principle underlies just about, all of the Pope's teaching. He talks about in The Joy of the Gospel that realities are greater than ideas, or more important than ideas, right? And that's throughout all of Amoris Laetitia. He's focused on the real life of couples, and not just when they're in like irregular relationships and things like that, but in general, like that's the most important thing. And so that's in his discussions about sexuality. That's in his discussions about chastity. That's in his discussions about regular married life. Is reality is more important than ideas. I was talking with a Catholic counselor not too long ago, and we were having a very similar conversation, and he was expressing some frustration with how theology of the body is presented in the United States. And I'm like, well, have you read Amoris Laetitia? And he's like, Paul, when I read it, I cried. He's like, it was written by a counselor. He's like, I felt like it was written for me, right? And by someone who's actually listened to people, right? And that's very much the sense of it. Even when he talks about chastity, not just in Amoris Laetitia, but in the letter that he wrote about Saint Joseph. I wrote about this last week. When he talks about chastity, it's the Pope's definition of chastity is love free of possessiveness. It's not, are you not having sex before you're married, right? It's not, are you not using contraception? It's love free of possessiveness. And there's a whole chapter on chastity in the Catechism, and it goes into great detail, draws a lot from John Paul II, how it's this like interior ordering where our passions are ordered into our will, and then we're able to then freely give ourselves to another and then freely receive another. And they're speaking the same thing. Pope Francis just says it a lot more concisely, but where I'm free to love without the fear or the need that I'm not going to be able to receive in return, where I'm free to love without like, what's keeping score, right? And not just with sex, but with everything in marriage and a family, where like I'm free to wake up in the morning and get the kids breakfast and not keep score and think, okay, so tomorrow morning my wife's going to do it. That's the freedom that chaste love is. And it's very, very real. And when the Pope talks about it, it's like concrete acts of love for the real people in front of you, not some ideal, right? Not that the ideals, not that we shouldn't ever talk about them, but the Pope just brings it really down to earth.
My perception of a lot of the ways that the theology of the body is presented, like in popular maybe discourse, and as background, I used to teach natural family planning for several years and was involved in this closely. So that's the experience I'm drawing from. But it was often used kind of as like an argument to try to persuade people to do certain things or not do certain things, like don't use contraception, don't have sex before marriage. And here's the reason why. It's because sex is so special and so important and so central. And it is, when you have sex, it's a renewal of the marital vows that you made on your wedding day, like in a physical fashion, which is kind of not quite it. Or it is a channel of grace between the spouses, which is also kind of not quite it. And it's just, we've elevated something to try to persuade people like this is just so special, so you will definitely want to conform your behavior once you realize how great this is. And we have taken it out of its full context of really this, it's to build up interpersonal union and communion. Like that's the whole purpose of the theology of the body, is to understand the union and all of the levels upon which it exists between spouses. And I did find, like, reading Amoris Laetitia, how like deeply Pope Francis speaks, like, realistically on the level of that emotional union. That is, it's not just we're going to take this part of your life and separate it out and then use it to make an argument about birth control methods or something. We are going to keep it in context and give you a realistic vision that can actually carry you through your life and all of the challenges. So I found that, like, really striking and very, like, a different way of contextualizing, like, how the church teaches or even talks about these things. Because it seems to me that a lot of the motivation for presenting the teaching in that way is sort of an apologetic. It's like, the culture is like this. They don't value sex enough. They think that contraception is fine. We need to make a great argument for why it shouldn't be that way. And so here's how we're going to do it. And so whenever you're approaching things from that perspective, you're going to miss the integrity of the whole.
And yeah, and the reality of marriage is that the whole thing is a channel of grace, right?
Right.
Like marriage isn't just your wedding day. It's it's the whole covenant. So every act of love in that marriage is the Lord transforming you and transforming your spouse. There's a phrase that the Pope uses in Amoris where it's like, in the lifelong sacrament of marriage, acts of love, through our acts of love, the Lord crafts the other person, right, into the man or woman they're supposed to be. That marriage is a type of craftsmanship, right, which takes a long time. And it's a lot of little gestures. Like it's not just sex. It's the whole of married life and every act of love that sanctifies me and my spouse.
And you can't legislate it. You can't just make some canon law or set down some rules and expect people to follow. I mean, Catholic guilt works on a lot of, but not as many people as it used to.
You mean there's no canon law about who should do the dishes on Wednesday nights?
No, but actually there might be, but I don't know. I'm not a canon lawyer, but no, but it's like one of, and this is the thing that I don't quite get. It's like this movement to enforce this view of orthodoxy, which is not always in communion with the Pope. Is an attempt to impose legislatively these rules to sort of try to not even, and it's not even like any of these things have a chance of winning legislation, but really unless people start to learn and become converted on what and actually the church's teaching and the love and desire, out of desire and love for God, want to improve and to become to follow Christ, then I mean I don't see how they plan, even though they're engaged in a culture war. I don't really see any route to victory.
Well, and also too, not just like you said, not just learn, but actually live it. Like when, I've been reading through Amoris Laetitia. It's and even I got a sneak preview of an article that Rachel's working on, which I won't spoil it all now like I did last week. But as I was reading through that as well, and kind of Rachel's like my go-to theology of the body person. So it's this idea that like you guys have been saying, like Amoris Laetitia is a blueprint or like an understanding of how, husband and wife, how people work within a family and what that all should look like, right? Not just a set of rules, right? And so when these have been deduced to a set of rules, which yes, would be theoretically legislatable. Anyway, when these circles tend to deduce it to a set of rules instead of a way to live, and as you're living, progressively grow toward deeper forms of love and chastity, right? When it's reduced to the rules you see in these circles, this is why you see, again, the kind of like warping of the sexuality anyway. This is why last week, I think it was, we were almost going to allude to the marital debt and these circles that believe that, like, you know, you can't deny sex to anybody in a marriage for any reason, right? Kind of thing. And it's because of that overinflation of the role of the physical act of sex without an understanding of how conjugal and married love work in the lived reality, right? Because if you're checking those boxes, but that's still like, that's your thing. Like, okay, I'm having married, uncontracepting sex, but then I have to say yes, you know, whenever my husband wants it. Like, that is not the church's teaching. That's just boxes that have been like, you've deduced the teaching so much to a fault. And so, yeah, so I was thinking of that, you know, that too, that this is a blueprint for a way of life. And also when we can kind of step back and take the out of context stuff and you know, the deduction to a fault and start examining these issues, it also gives space for other forms of love that are not just conjugal love. So if in our Catholic circles, the end all be all is having the right kind of like Catholic sex, right? Well, what does that do for celibates? Or what does that do for people not in heterosexual sacramental marriages? Like, what place does that give them, right? So the discussion of all the points that I have been going through in my chapter, speaking to the broadness of other definitions of even fruitfulness of the family and what to love looks like, right? I think it really, I think bringing that to the forefront and changing that discussion since the last like 20, 30 years of the apologetics focus on anti-contraception and anti-homosexual relationships. Like, I think if we can do that, we can really like find a place for things.
Yeah, there's
a place
a
for
ground
people.
to have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there's the ground to have a conversation about shared about experiences and how our experiences are working to the same reality of love, but in different ways and lived and experienced differently. And it's, sorry, Paul. Sorry.
I was going to say, as you were talking about the hyper focus, like two concrete examples came to mind. So one is in NFP circles and NFP culture. And I hear this said, and they pull up some like statistics to back it up, that essentially the claim is NFP is going to divorce-proof your marriage. In other words, if you have and only have the right kind of Catholic sex, that your marriage is divorce-proof, or something to that like allusion.
And it's an abuse of statistics.
Right.
It is. I mean,
it could be the strong religious, you know, religious beliefs cause of the marriage,
yeah.
But whether you're having the right kind of sex, come on.
There's so many layers wrong with it, but it's proof that there's like, we're focusing on one tree so much that we're going to ignore the whole forest. Mm-hmm. And the other is this focus on chastity. I think especially in teenage like chastity talks. And before the show, Melinda, you were talking about how you taught junior high theology of the body at one point, but there's such an emphasis on like, don't have sex before you're married, that we don't even talk about how to concretely love the person in front of me, so much that I don't think I've ever heard a Catholic chastity talk or curriculum spend any time, maybe significant, for sure no significant time, but maybe any time at all, talking about consent. Mm-hmm. And like, how do you concretely love the person in front of you in a non-possessive way, right? Because that's the definition of chastity, and not talk about consent, mm-hmm. or not consider consent in any way. Like we're focused on, you know, you can only have the right kind of Catholic sex, and we're missing everything else that's involved in actually loving someone.
And it cuts off really opportunities for talking with others about, you know, the Me Too movement when you can't acknowledge the importance of consent. And the other kind of problem with a hyper focus on one area is sometimes you become so focused on one area that it becomes idolatrous. And so if we're making an idol of marriage as this relationship that leads to complete spousal fulfillment by virtue of being a marriage, then that itself is an idol. And I believe Dawn Goldstein brought this up in her recent post, that marriage itself doesn't fulfill us because it's the couple who are submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And it's a shared reverence for Christ that fulfills us. And so when we focus on maybe some of these talking points, and that becomes what people understand marriage and sexuality to be for, then we're kind of unwittingly presenting idols to people sometimes. And then they're not capable of even recognizing that or talking about that in a different sort of way when it's been presented to them as the antidote to a culture that doesn't value the things that they value. So I think what I've appreciated about Amoris Laetitia the most is that it kind of opens up this really broad approach and ground for conversation about these issues in a way that we should be able to trust the Pope as the guarantor of orthodoxy to provide us that ground where we can have orthodox, even speculative conversations while really digging deeply in different ways. So hopefully people are doing that with this year of Amoris Laetitia. But we'll be talking more about this on the site. Does anyone else have like anything to wrap? I don't want to cut anyone off if they had a great theology of the body point. I know Mike has an announcement about site content, but no more sex talk right now. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so just want to update our readers. I know that a lot of you guys have really enjoyed our Sunday reflections by Father Satish Joseph, mostly. We've had a few fill-ins here and there. And, you know, it really happened by accident. I think I heard one of his homilies online, and I messaged him and said I really enjoyed it. And then, you know, next thing you know, he sends me the text to his next homily, and we were looking for content for Where Peter Is, and I posted it on a Sunday, and then people read it, and people seemed to enjoy it. And especially during the pandemic, people really liked being able to read, you know, a very straightforward exegesis on the Sunday readings. Basically, it was his homily, but then, you know, I would tweak it and edit it, take out bullet points, put headers in. And if he said, you know, in a few minutes, when we approach the altar to receive the Eucharist, and I'd like rewrite it to say, whenever we approach the altar to receive the Eucharist. Anyway, he's going to still be doing that for us, but at his recommendation, and I thought it was a good idea, he suggested that we get a rotation of 4 different people, one to take a different week of the month, to reflect on the Sunday readings. So that's going to start next Sunday, Palm Sunday. Father Alex Roche of the Diocese of Scranton is going to provide us with his Palm Sunday reflection. And then the following Sunday, Easter Sunday, one of our writers will be a female biblical scholar, Angela Rasmussen. And you're familiar with her work. She wrote earlier this week, I think, on Good God, Bad God, Old Testament God and New Testament God, and haven't nailed down the 4th one yet. But but don't worry, we're still friends with Father Satish, and he is planning to. And if you do want to read his homily or listen to his homily every week, he has a YouTube channel. He has his website. If you look at the bio on anything that he's written, it has a link to idamisa.com. And then finally, as you guys know, we're basically a volunteer nonprofit shoestring budget grassroots organization. So if you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. If you go to wherepeteris.com, there's a link on the right-hand column, become a patron, Patreon/where_/Peter or
wow,
where...
we really have one of these now at the end of our shows. That's awesome. I feel like legit.
Yeah. So, and brought to you by, what are you guys drinking? I have another energy drink. I have Red energy drink. It's Amazon's house brand of.
It's legitimately called Red Energy Drink for those
the flavor,
listening later.
Yeah.
You can't see Mike's can.
Yeah, I'm holding up a can. It says Red Energy Drink. The flavor is red.
It's red.
It's about what you would expect.
I'd expect spicy.
No. Think like lollipops or popsicles.
Like cherry?
No, red.
Or a mix.
It's red.
I mean, I'm thinking like cinnamon gum.
No,
you know,
no. Like red.
Spicy
Big
red.
red.
No,
they
not
have
big
blue
red.
too?
No.
Like,
What's that?
what do you think when you see what do you think when you taste bread? Like, no, do they have blue too or just red?
I would assume I don't know. I'm satisfied with the red.
You have low standards for your drinks.
You should have done your research into this, so you could tell us all about like what it means, what they
Well,
have.
maybe
to
our
offer.
Patreon sponsors, if there's enough
we need
interest.
a Patreon level where you supply Mike Lewis with new and creative energy drinks.
Because it's really what gets me through
to
the day.
fuel his
Or
work.
are they paying you to endorse this on your like super popular YouTube channel? Are you getting an endorsement?
No.
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 No discount.
No. But if you'd like to be a sponsor, go to our Patreon page.
So speaking of endorsements and shout outs, can I give a shout out to the Black Catholic Messenger podcast? They had an episode this week.
Yes.
About the shootings in Atlanta, and it was a great discussion. Instead of us talking, non-diverse group here talking about race issues, they had a really good discussion.
Yeah, I'm friends with actually a lot of we know Nate and we know Efren. No, Efren wasn't on that one. Steven.
So story. Do we? I mean, we're running.
No, we don't.
anyway.
We have
another
time. All the
All
time
right.
you need.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week. We will not be here on Thursday. We'll be here. We're thinking Wednesday. So
Wednesday night, because it's Holy Week next week.
Oh,
Holy
yeah.
Week. Triduum.
I knew that.
How do you pronounce
Spy
it, Melinda?
Wednesday, I guess.
Tritium.
Triduum.
Yeah, Triduum.
Tritium.
Just 2 U's. 2 U's.
Triduum. Like vacuum cleaner.
Why are you asking me? Like, I'm the worst Catholic on this podcast.
Say bye. We're going to turn this off now. Have a good weekend,
Okay,
everyone.
bye.
Bye.